Apprenticing can be one of the best strategies for training volunteers in your church and in your ministry. I know that there's opportunities that I had when I was a volunteer in ministry at my church where I got to apprentice with other leaders who had done that for some time and were able to show me what to do, what not to do. And it wasn't even formal, actually. It was more like, hey, they know what they're doing. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. So let me learn from you. Let me ask questions. But if you can formalize that process, if you can make it something that is more of a checklist and that can be repeatable, and you can get volunteers that have been serving for 2 or 3 years or more to help those that are just starting out, then you're going to have a great plan to train volunteers. And I think apprenticing, especially early on, when you're talking about bringing on a new volunteer, is one of the best ways to train them well. And one of the things I say, I don't know if it's true, and obviously I'm just making up the percentage, but I believe a volunteer can be trained to 80% of what they need with a good onboarding apprenticeship plan. So if they're just starting to serve, if you have a solid apprenticeship plan, you can train them to 80% of where they need to be. And then the rest of the time they serve in your ministry, you're just growing that 80% to 81, 82%, 83%. And of course, none of us get there. So there really isn't 100%. We can all grow and improve. But apprenticeship can also be used to help volunteers take on bigger leadership. So in our church, for example, we were intentional years ago about having a leadership pipeline, which is just a structure for leadership in our church. Part of that pipeline was volunteers. And then we had a specific step for apprentice, and then leaders, coach, and directors. That was the pipeline: volunteer, leader, coach, director. But we originally had a second step in the pipeline there called apprenticeship. And it was designed so that volunteers would intentionally be apprenticed to become leaders. Now, since then, we've kind of not used that as much because we're using apprenticeship all over the place. Hopefully, we're apprenticing new volunteers, leaders, coaches, directors across the board. But you get the idea. We thought it was so important that we should put it in there. So you can use an apprenticeship plan for new volunteers, but you can also use it for volunteers to help them take on bigger leadership roles. Apprenticeship, at its core, can be seen as 5 basic steps. Step 1, I do. So if I'm the one apprenticing and I've got a new volunteer, let's say, I do, you watch, we talk, right? That's simple. Step 2, I do, you help, and we talk. So now you're getting involved. You're doing this with me. Step 3, you do, I help, we talk. Just switching those roles there. But now we have switched. We're now to the place where you're doing it and I'm helping. Step 4, you do, I watch, we talk. So you're doing it on your own. I'm observing, giving you feedback afterwards, talking about it. And then step 5, kind of looking forward to how do you pass this on? You do, someone else watches, you all talk. And that's where you can continue this thing going on. But in your ministry, you could create a simple apprenticeship plan for volunteers in your ministry. Decide how long that apprenticeship will be. I like about 4 weeks. Sometimes 2 weeks might be enough if you can get enough in there. 4 weeks is kind of ideal. That's what we do at my church. 6 weeks, 8 weeks could be a possibility. If you're a small group leader in my church, like an adult small group leader, it's a 6-month apprenticeship. And it's not because you need 6 months to learn everything you're going to learn. It's more like we need 6 months to observe you. A lot of that I do, you watch, we talk, you do, I watch, we talk. You need about 6 months there to really get to know someone and how are they going to fit in this role? Is this going to be a culture fit for the church? Because adult small groups in my church are the primary vehicle for connection, for discipleship within a group. And so the culture of the church needs to show up there. And so you really have to trust those leaders, because it's not like kids ministry or even student ministry where we're all somewhat together and other people are observing. A small group leader who was, let's say, divisive could be that way without church leadership even knowing. So it's really important there. But that's an example. We'll do 6-month apprenticeship. But for a lot of roles, guest services, kids ministry, student ministry, worship arts, things like that, you might be able to do 4 weeks. We will sometimes we call it 4 serves, because there are some volunteers in our kids ministry that serve once a month, like on stage leading large group. They'll do once a month, but they'll do it for all the services that weekend. So 4 weeks wouldn't be a helpful apprenticeship because you'd only do it one time. So we do 4 serves. So you do that 4 months, but generally it's 4 weeks. Again, you need to pick and decide what that is for you. And then this is probably the most important part in terms of being able to make this repeatable. Create a checklist for everything the new volunteer will learn. Everything from hey, here's part of the vision of the ministry, or here's a core theological thing that we believe that's really important, to here's where the curriculum is. Here's how, you can ask or let somebody know if you're not going to make it. Like, here is the scope and sequence of the curriculum and the content that we're doing. Like those little things. Here is who you need to see if there's an issue. Here's how we report if there's some kind of incident. I mean, all of these things that are important, and they could be taught, just talked about, but who's going to remember that, right? So an apprenticeship, you can put it in a checklist so that they'll make sure. And the idea is that they own the checklist so that they'll own it and they'll make sure they get done what's on it. So consider having a unique checklist for every volunteer role. Now, you don't need that if they're, if it's 95% the same. But obviously, a host on stage in one of our environments is a very different apprenticeship checklist than a small group leader who's leading kids or students or something like that, which is a very different checklist than if you lead, let's say, the welcome team at, in our main services, and you've got volunteers in the parking lot, you got volunteers inside the welcome desk and all those kinds of things. So those checklists would look different. And then assign items on the checklist to weeks of the apprenticeship. So for example, if you have a 4-week apprenticeship, maybe week 1, you cover these 8 items on the checklist. Week 2, you get these 5 items. Week 3, these 6 items, and so on and so forth. And ideally, theme it out in a way that makes sense. And like that whole week might be about safety and security. And then they come back and that's about curriculum and content. And this is all like next week is all logistics, whatever that might be. Assign them on your checklist, group them in terms of ways that make sense, and assign them to a specific week. And then I think a kind of a nice hack, a bonus here, is to provide online, on-demand content to supplement that in-person training. So for example, imagine that week, first week of the apprenticeship, on the checklist, when they get there, you're going to talk some security and policies like that, safety, some things like that are on the checklist. And maybe there's 8 things. Well, that week, maybe you would have asked them to watch a video on demand. And it might even be the kind of video that, like, I know a lot of churches, including my church, you are to get a background check and be able to serve, you have to watch these videos about safety and security. And they may be videos your church created, it might be something created by the company you use for background checks. They could watch that during the week. And then when they're there to serve, we go through these items on the checklist. And then maybe next week they watch videos from your curriculum provider about the curriculum and why is it the way it is and what's the strategy behind it and all that. And then on Sunday, you're training them on the checklist about here's how the curriculum is used here. Here's where we put the resources. Here's how you get the curriculum. Here's the freedom you have or don't have to edit that or do that differently, whatever that looks like. So I think if you can mix the two together, that would be really helpful. Check out our volunteer bundle at ministryboost.org if you want to get some of those checklists. We put 27 apprenticeship checklists in the volunteer bundle. The volunteer bundle is a series of documents and files like volunteer job descriptions, handbooks. There's a whole bonus 50 checklists for kids ministry if you serve in kids ministry. But one of the things that's in there is 27 apprenticeship checklists, so you don't have to start from scratch. If you don't want to start from scratch, go ahead and get that. And then start apprenticing new volunteers. And here's the thing, if you've not done this before, if you're just now starting this, I would consider putting the whole plan together and then not just doing it with new volunteers, for sure, do that. But maybe you have a period of a month where everybody goes through it. And yes, it's a refresher. They're supposed to already know. But how many of them forgot? How many of them never got it in the first place? So I think it'd be great to take whatever it is, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, however long you're going to do it, and put all of your volunteers through that if they hadn't done that before. But certainly start doing that with new volunteers so that they're getting apprenticed, they're learning, they're developing, and being the kind of volunteer you want them to be. Train them to 80%, and then you'll continue to train them to get beyond that. Again, check out ministryboost.org if you want to get that volunteer bundle. We have a membership where you can get all of our resources, all of our courses for one low cost every month, and just a little bit more, and you can have your whole team. If you have multiple staff that want to access those resources, you can get the team edition there. Check that out at ministryboost.org and watch this next video about putting together a year-long strategy for training your volunteers.